Hi all, my name is Nathan Beel, and while I was hoping to make this presentation in person, alas, my body had different plans. But I'm really excited that I've still got the opportunity to present some thoughts on the future of counselling education. So in this presentation, I'm firstly going to note the context of the relationship between the counselling profession and counsellor education, and how both of these mutually influence each other. Then I'm going to look at the factors and trends that may influence our future, and for which we might consider in either our planning at our individual institution level or in our corporate level as NHCPE and the profession of counselling and psychoeducation. And then finally, I'm going to propose some ideas about how we might move forward. Counselling education prepares the next generation of counsellors and supports the pipeline of future members of the profession. We attempt to meet the aspirations of prospective and current students by providing a pathway into their career in counselling and prepare them for employment. We train them in the skills, the values, the attitudes and the ethics of the counselling profession so that they can take these and deliver important quality services to the clients and communities they service, and so they can develop professional identities as counsellors. Our institutions with professional accreditation will aim to align with the training standards of the respective professional bodies. We rely on these training standards to help inform educators of the expectations of the profession, to ensure sufficient resourcing from academic leadership, to ensure minimum standards are maintained, and that adequate staffing is provided. The training standards provide protection for quality and resourcing. We rely on the training standards to be reasonable to ensure their compliance is not too burdensome or costly to the institution or the student. We rely on them to uphold the minimum expectations of the profession, to encourage aspirations of higher quality, and to ensure that they address the diversity of human experience, regionality, disability, and do not contradict higher institution expectations. We rely on the training standards to reflect contemporary thinking and not be mired in historical values that may have been disproven over time. We rely on there to be some level of evidence base behind them, not just reflect the beliefs and priorities of those who develop them. The training standards are important documents, and I'm mindful also that government is also currently developing its own national training standards, of which I hope that counselling educators as a key stakeholder will have a voice into these. We as training providers have a responsibility to advance research and scholarship, to have evidence-based teaching practices, and to demonstrate current expertise and currency of practice in what we are teaching, both theoretical and in practice. We have access to the latest research, and we also contribute to preparing new research through our own research and that of our students. We are grateful that both peak bodies have peer-reviewed journals and may have research committees to support counselling research in Australia. We engage with industry, whether it be through advisory committees and also through industry connections through our placement teams. We rely on the profession to engage in industry also to ensure the standards are informed by industry voices. We also might consider that there may be a mechanism for client voice representation in the training standards and courses, given they are our end users. Training providers influence the profession's credibility via the quality of our graduates, the level of training, the quality and volume of research, and our own engagement in the industry and in the profession itself. Counselling education and the profession of counselling are mutually interdependent. At its most basic level, the profession brings us students, and we bring new members and also new employees to industry. At a more complex level, we are often mutually engaged with committee membership, scholarly discourse, providing feedback and comment. And for training providers, we adjust and are guided by the profession's ethical codes, training standards, and the impacts of the profession's lobbying for recognition. In my view, I believe it is important for the NHCPE and counselling educators to stay connected with the professional bodies and participate as able. Our focus may be different, but both the profession and our roles are complementary. When thinking about how to approach this question of preparing for the future of counselling education, three things come to mind. The first is that we need to recognise and research existing trends and work out how to respond to them. Do we want to embrace, resist, or something in the middle? We do need to recognise them as they're likely to continue unless we get a worldwide catastrophe such as what we've just recently had. We can also consider what our current challenges are and how we might like to address them as best that we can, or at least progress while being mindful of them. And then we can look at what we aspire to. For instance, if we aspire to becoming a leader internationally in counselling education, that will have implications for how we might plan on addressing it. Another factor not listed is recognising how society will be, as society and governments, employers and clients will shape our future too. When I look at some of the Alexander Street Press videos of counselling in the 90s and see the authoritarian style of some of the counsellors, I absolutely cringe. But I also acknowledge they reflected the culture of the day and the discourses of the professions they evolved in. So how do we stay reflective yet stable in light of the emerging social trends? So trends into the future. So as far as learning goes, accessibility of learning will continue to become prioritised by educational institutions, given the greater recognition of students from diverse backgrounds, those with disability, underserved population, first in family and adult learners. Technology has enabled more solutions and increased expectations for adaptations to be made. In counselling, it forces us to reconsider what is actually essential in the preparation of counsellors and what are merely traditional means of learning. Prior to COVID, many institutions were primarily catering to students who could physically attend a campus, whereas post-COVID, online and hybrid delivery has become normative almost across the board. Not only are many students reluctant to attend if given the opportunity, staff often prefer to work from home themselves. We can expect greater pressure from students and institutions alike to justify why face-to-face attendance is required. If we are going to argue for mandated person-to-person attendance, we may need to provide research evidence rather than anecdotal evidence in relation to learning outcomes. I predict that the trend towards more learning emphasis more learning emphasis than teaching emphasis will continue. Rather than being the sage in the stage, the emphasis will be on the guide on the side. Our role will be thinking of curating a learning journey and selecting a variety of different media formats to do this. This again is not new, but possibly reflects the greater democratisation of learning and the expectations of on-demand learning in the student's own time. This is not the TV generation which waits for their show to be broadcast, but this is the Netflix generations with on-demand viewing and expectations and resources. There will be greater demand on formative assessment to prepare students for summative assessments, and while it is challenging for academics to make time to provide feedback, we may need to look for, or at least document better, how we do this. We can also use technology to help with this as well. One way is to build in the on-demand interactive resources such as H5P, but also artificial intelligence and other interactive formats which will become more normative. Students are not going to be satisfied with chalk and talk and reading countless articles and book chapters. Again, many of us are already probably doing this, but we're probably going to need to do more of it into the future. A final note is that accountability is going to continue being emphasised both internally to track student engagement with courseware, but also centering on student feedback and employment outcomes. Prospective students will also be able to find information about the institution reputation easier. So here is one example where I used Google Bard to find out the best rated counselling course in Australia. I suspect many students will begin using these to help identify training courses. It may be pertinent to identify what differentiates you from the rest so that when students enter these details, yours come up. So I've got a question here. I want to train to become a counsellor. What is the best rated Master of Counselling course in Australia that is accredited and that I can do by distance? And it's, lo and behold, apparently, Deakin University is rated as the best. Now, I don't know how it drew in this information and where it came to this conclusion, but it's certainly, this is what happens when you put that in. Now, I also put in when we scroll down, it lists further, so Master of Counselling University of Notre Dame, Edith Cowan, University of Southern Queensland, University of New England and University of Newcastle. So it's interesting also, this one's particularly chosen universities. It doesn't have any colleges listed here in Bard. But I did go through and typed it in Bing, which is based on ChatGPT-4, and it's got Master of Counselling at AIPC and Master of Counselling at Torrens University. Okay, so different AI will generate different answers to that. But again, it's just I just thought I'd poke them in there, just a bit of fun, and just to show you what's out there at the moment. Which leads us into the question of artificial intelligence in the higher education space in counselling. Now, in my view, we are in the artificial intelligence revolution. Strap on your seatbelts because it's going to be one hell of a ride. Artificial intelligence, or AI, provides a technological means to help us to become more efficient, a bit like having a personal assistant. We can use AI to be a teaching assistant, a curriculum and rubric designer, a research assistant, a writing assistant, a counselling peer assistant, and perhaps more. I'm just blown out of the water by all the potential uses of this. For our students, AI can become a personal tutor, a proofreader, a study guide, and provide formative assessments for them. So they can type in there and say, here is the information that I'm having to study. I want you to design a list of 10 multiple choice questions on this topic. And then I'm going to put a response in, and I want you to let me know if I'm right or wrong. And if I'm wrong, I want you to tell me why I'm wrong and give me an explanation for it. Okay, so this is amazing how they can use this, and we can teach our students how to use AI to be able to support their learning, which is really what we're trying to do. We're trying to help them to support their learning. So in addition, AI may become a virtual client and observer. Okay, so students may not even need to have organised times where they get together with a client and an observer to do their role plays with, but they may already be able to start doing this. And I know they can, because there are various services out there available where they'll set up a scenario, and the scenario is that you maybe do motivational interviewing with the client. And if you ask the wrong question, the client will answer you accordingly and give you feedback, and vice versa if you ask the right question. So this is just going to become more and more realistic over time. So I certainly am using AI a lot more than Google these days. This is my first go-to nowadays. I believe it's important for us to learn and to teach students about how to use AI effectively, how to write prompts, and prompts are the requests, because different quality prompts will give you different quality answers, and how to use it ethically as well. So resisting AI is equivalent to resisting the printing press or resisting the internet when they both came out. Both are transformative societies, and there's no going back. Now, while AI does create concerns about the academic integrity and information hallucinations, where it sort of makes up stuff, because it's not intelligent in itself, it's a large language model, so it's drawing on sequences of text which commonly go together. So while it does create various concerns, I believe many of these will be addressed globally, because we're not the only ones. Counselling education is not the only ones to have to manage this. This is an international question around, the academic integrity and that sort of thing. But in my view, we need to shift to consider what exactly we should be measuring in the AI age, given that more and more work involving intelligence and memory will be able to be done faster and better by AI. So what should we, as counselling educators, think about in terms of assessment? What are we actually assessing now that students have got these research assistants essentially and these guides, this incredible intelligence by their side? What should we be assessing them now, given this is likely to be the way of the future? And how do we do our assessments? We shouldn't just be simply doing more of the same and testing memory, because they've got access to the biggest memory bank and the world's biggest experts at the tap of a finger, okay, on their keyboard. So what should we rely on their memory, and their memory can only take in so much, and all of our memories are to some degree fallible. Or do we think, okay, well, our students now have access to the biggest memory bank in all of history? How do we design our assessments given that, so they can utilize and make that memory work for them? It's unlikely, I believe, to put counsellors and educators out of work, though certainly there are AI apps out there which you can, create a counsellor, and you can tell the counsellor what your preferences are, the AI, in terms of its responses, and whether you want an empathic responder, whether you want someone to give you advice, whether you want some, the whole range of different things you can actually ask from these bots, they call them. But I think our roles are certainly, people are still going to want to have the flesh and blood counsellors and counselling educators as well. So we don't have to worry too much about our jobs, in my view, for the foreseeable future. I'm not saying it's never going to happen. So my invitation would be to have an openness towards AI rather than choose to stay ignorant and then dig in with, this is the way we've always done it, thank you very much. I'd encourage you to test it for anything that requires intelligence, memory, anything that you would normally do. Say, AI, can you do this for me? And just see what results you get. Okay, I'm starting to bring it into tutorials now and saying, hey, students, look up this concept and play around with some prompts around this and tell us which prompts are the ones which give you the best quality information. And then you can go away and compare this against what your readings say and, you know, how are they different and what might be different about them. Now, I used AI to research this presentation and create the formatting on these slides. The question is, how can we ethically use and teach students to use AI to support their learning and their clinical work? So if we want to be a counselling trade, we should focus solely on skills and knowledge, and we should neglect research. But if we want to be a profession, we need to value research and ensure sufficient research training is required of students. So while we are a practice profession, and with being a practice profession, there's often less interest in research, and it can feel quite intimidating to many of our lecturers who are very highly skilled practitioners. But research is an important aspect which contributes to our field's credibility. So as academics, we face more pressure to publish more in high impact journals, to earn more money in research funding, and to be more involved in research teams rather than lone wolf researchers. These trends are likely to continue unless there's major pushback from higher education institutions and back to government. As this is the case, we need to consider how to respond, and this is something we in the NHCPE Research Subcommittee have been working on. This whole question as to how to build counselling research capacity. We also need to develop more homegrown PhDs in counselling to ensure counselling trained educators are the default educator, and also that counselling educators are able to produce research and supervise doctorates like educators in other professions can. We also need to ensure that counselling students are able to progress through to PhDs by ensuring they have sufficient research preparation in the foundation counselling training, or at least that there's pathways which are really clear to them and that we can put them onto. Otherwise, in some ways, we as educators are contributing to the dearth of doctorates and also contributing to the need to hire educators coming from other disciplines. Okay, so this section is about looking at employability as a goal. So employability is an important higher education goal of the federal government, employers and students. Given we administer professional degrees, how much should we as a profession focus on employability, which would require more diversification of knowledge and skills? Or should we keep a narrow focus of learning more targeted to therapy in preparation for entry into the profession only? Should we aim broad but shallow or narrow but deep in the initial training? The name of the degrees suggests narrow, but what does this mean for the job market that requires more diversified knowledge and adaptability? Yes, our counselling graduates are getting work, but do they feel equipped for more diverse requirements, and could we help them become more employable? Counsellors who learn to generalise, or generalists with a specialisation of counselling? I'm saying this polemically, but the question is around emphasis. The workplace typically requires generalists who can specialise, which is the inverse to what the training standards currently emphasise. Do we want to do more of the same, or do we need to increase employability potential, or potentially find a way to do both better? Another angle on employability is how much do we teach our students how to prepare themselves to be competitive in the job market? Universities and higher education institutions often provide employability training and resources, but as a discipline, we have insider knowledge about what's expected of counsellors. What are counselling employers seeking? What can give our graduates an edge to enable them to get their foot in the door of initial post-graduation employment? The government measures employment outcomes with the Australian Graduate Outcome Survey by the Quality Indicators for Learning and Teaching, QUILT survey. We need to be thinking about what will make our students more employable and competitive in the job market, because our rankings are there for all to see now. So students are going to be looking at these things and seeing whether what the quality of our training is. I think we also will continue to see greater emphasis on applied learning, and I think this has always been counselling our strong point. However, as we deliver applied learning via online learning, should cause us to consider whether we can do it better. Elements in the counselling profession have often been reluctant to fully embrace online delivery for fear of losing the interpersonal connectedness of counselling. Then we've got the adaptability and portability of knowledge and skills, which I've been alluding to earlier in this particular slide, which I think is essential for our students graduating from foundation training. So just an example, my foundation training taught me CBT and solution-focused therapy, both geared for short-term treatment. Yet my first job as a counsellor was delivering weekly counselling, anywhere from 30 to 52 sessions, so basically up to a whole year of counselling weekly, in addition to daily group work. I was not prepared for longer term work. My next job after this required single session crisis telephone counselling skills. So I went from long-term work within a year to, or even 18 months at times with some clients, down to single session crisis line 20-minute calls. Okay, so such a swing within the first few years of my career. So whatever we teach, we need to be mindful how we are preparing students for a diversity of counselling contexts, formats and durations. How do we teach them to be versatile in acquiring what they need? Okay, so it's just something to me, I think about. To me, I think the common factors approach is a really good model to support diversity, because it is, it's common across everything we do. But it's just something I thought that I'd flag as something we might consider. Another area is student readiness with technology. So many of our students already learn to find information online in databases, use word processors such as Microsoft Word, use learning management systems such as Moodle, use Zoom, etc. So understanding to teach the ethical and competent usage of technology. So how many of us teach students how to use practice management software, for instance, how to ensure client files and email communications are appropriately and securely stored? Now that we are in the era of practice management software, we probably should consider integrating the use of this into our curriculum a lot more clearly. So some providers will provide institutions free usage of their software, given that it makes business sense for students to develop a relationship and familiarity with their product. So what I'm thinking is, I think it's Core Plus. It's an Australian group, so it keeps all the data here, and they're very happy for institutions to utilise their practice management software, and staff members can gain access to the notes, the client notes, even if they're sort of pseudo clients, through the supervisor role in there. So there's different opportunities out there, but we do need to make sure that our students understand enough that, simply having their case notes in a Word document on their computer, what happens if it gets stolen, the drive gets stolen, or gets hacked, the computer, are their clients' confidential material likely to get in the wrong hands? So how do we factor in preparation for private clients and for EAPs? So while most of us would like to discourage graduates from going into either of these areas until they have sufficient work experience in the field, many are probably going to enter these, particularly if it's a choice between unemployment or self-employment. I wonder if we need to think about how to prepare people sufficiently in training, or perhaps post-training course run by professional bodies. I'm particularly thinking EAP, because EAP is often the first step into employment if they're unable to get work straight after their graduation. So just flagging this as one potential issue to be mindful of. Another one I think we need to be mindful of is lifelong learning and micro-credentialing, which are tipped to become more prized, and particularly based on the trends in society, where people often graduate with a 3-year degree in psychology, very little skills-based training in there, but they're in roles which demand skills and counselling skills. But they may not be wanting to do an entire master's degree in counselling. So are there ways that we can think about supporting the professional development in there, but with micro-credentials? So again, something to be mindful of, and which might be something which both contribute skills and knowledge to the field, but also an opportunity to increase your student load as well. And then finally, we might need to consider how do we prepare graduates for engagement and employment in the mental health system, given that we're moving in this direction and the government, is looking at this with the training standards, national training standards. We're likely to be heading towards this space. As counselling is more recognised, there's going to be greater expectation for involvement and more opportunities to work in various mental health related roles. We need our training to provide mental health literacy for our students, while keeping our counselling soul. We need to assist students to be able to accommodate both paradigms, and this needs to be integrated into the curriculum rather than leaving the integration for individual students to do. And I've seen this happen where, we teach our abnormal psychology and mental disorders and all this, and we generally get a psychologist to teach it who've not been socialised as counsellors, been socialised as psychologists. And so then we teach our counselling students the counselling side in a different subject, and then we leave it for them and assume the counselling students. So one moment they're talking evidence-based treatment and needing to properly assess people and identify the disorder, and then we select the treatment modality based on the disorder that we think that we've assessed, not diagnosed but assessed. But then the discourse has changed from maybe more of the common factors type discourse and therapeutic relationship and client preferences and the discourse that counsellors typically do. So are we just wanting to become a clone of the mental health workforce working within the medical model, or is there some way we prepare our students to actually integrate much better in terms of what they do as counsellors, what's important for them, but how to interact and operate within a mental health workforce as well? And this is, I think, important also because what value do counsellors bring the mental health workforce? Different mental health providers, psychologists, we know what value they bring, and they bring counselling. Social workers, they bring social work, but they can also do counselling. Counselling, we just do counselling, and we actually don't necessarily bring anything new to the table. Or if we do, we need to clarify what is it that's new? What is it? Why should they have a counselling person on the team? And we might sort of say, well, because it's needed. We've got lots of work available and there's a shortage, mental health workforce shortage, so it's needed. But what happens when it's not needed anymore? Okay, so I think we need to think really clearly around this question, because otherwise, once there's, it's more competitive to get jobs, counsellors might once again find themselves locked out of that space. Okay, so curriculum. In my view, we need to ensure the curriculum reflects a changing society and workforce and funding needs. It needs to be certainly informed by the professional body's training standards, and it will be important that this training standards are kept up to speed with changing trends. But we can also be conducting research into various trends, workforce trends, and trends, international trends, and ensuring that our teaching and the curriculums are updated as well. I think it's also important that our curriculum supports our coherent and consistent professional identity. There is much literature on professional identity in counselling, including how to foster professional identity within counselling students. I think we run the risk currently of not having coherent and consistent identity represented, partly due to the fact that I don't think we've fully clarified our philosophical basis to date, and partly because many of the educators who teach counselling students were never themselves socialised into the counselling profession, but were socialised into different professions with their own different traditions and different values that they focus on, that they emphasise. So it's a case of they don't know what they don't know, and there is a risk that they merely socialise our students into the values that they were socialised with their own professions when they were entering into their own profession. So the training standards are important here because at the moment the training standards, in my view, are philosophically laissez-faire, which, while supporting the richness of diversity in the counselling field, means that philosophically we're up for grabs for whoever's teaching the students. There is no philosophical coherency in my view. So another thing I'd like to suggest is that we think about standardisation. Standardisation is discussed as a means of supporting the professional recognition and identity, and also provides more predictability for employers. Now, in some ways we have standardised with our training standards. That does bring a degree of standardisation. But having some qualifications that are based in what might be considered boutique therapies that lead to counsellor registration raises questions about what employers might actually receive if it's very much outside the mainstream of therapeutic models. Okay, so it's at the moment, given that we all do our own thing and we've all got our own models, is what can employers expect when they hire someone with a counselling qualification? Do they know what they're getting? Now, is there some degree of consistency? I think with social work there is, with psychology there is, with counselling, our diversity I think is our biggest weakness at the moment, and I think our diversity should be expressed in post foundation training, not in foundation training. I think foundation training, we should have a predictable product where students are able to graduate and employers know what they're getting. Okay, just my view. You can there might be a lot of people who disagree very strongly with that. That's just my view. Another question we've got is, will 2 years be enough to change perceptions of counsellors being undertrained And is it sufficient to ensure counsellors are sufficiently well-rounded and also have opportunities for substantial research experience sufficient for entry into most PhDs? So while the market of mature age, career-changing students and psychology graduates like the masters, is it sufficient? Does it have sufficient, volume and opportunity for good grounding? Or does the profession need to require tighter entry into the masters, such as specifying degrees that are eligible, such as you need to do a psychology or social work or something which gives a more broader foundation into it? Again, these are just questions. I think in the future there'll be more push for internationalisation of counselling and alignment with international training standards, such as those of CACREP. I'm not sure when, but I think that this would be a developmental stage in our own history of counselling in Australia. I recognise that both ACA and PACFA do engage internationally, and I think in the future this will continue to develop as well. I also believe we need more Australian counselling scholarship and textbooks to support students. We have plenty of texts written by psychologists or by counsellors in the US or Britain, and while useful, they don't always align well with what might be called Australian values, in inverted commas. Yet we do have some textbooks available written by Australian counselling academics, and these are listed on the NHCPE website. If you know of any which aren't listed there, which should be, please let me know. In my view, it's really important that we support our Australian industry, but also that we're supporting our, the values behind the Australian industry textbooks as well. But even writing textbooks is quite a challenge too, because where do we find academics who can write textbooks really, really well? And we do exist, but it's not always easy to find. But we can also publish through commercial publish or open source. And I've just got So here's an example of, I've just recently been an editor for a open source textbook in counselling common client issues in counselling, and we decided to write this because there's just nothing out there. It's all abnormal psychology that was out there, and there's nothing really geared for counselling, and we decided to do it open source because we didn't want accessibility to be an issue, but also open source meant that people can look at chapters and rewrite them for their own contexts. Okay, but what it does, and why I'm showing you this page, is on this page you can see, since it's been published, I think in March, you can see the various chapters and how many visitors on each chapter and how many page views are on each chapter, where it comes from. But you can sort of see that this is another way of seeing, hey, what we're doing, this is an impact thing. Okay, so we may not get lots of citations like some other disciplines might get, but here's another way of being able to show that yes, our scholarship is making an impact. Okay, so just think about that. USQ does, if you were interested, USQ does have an open source publisher, and they're always willing to look for things, but you might also have your own alternative as well. Okay, so here what I've done is I've put ChatGPT and asked for future predictions for counselling education, and this is what AI said based on its sort of understanding and trends in the large language model. And I think some of these are quite evident. Technological integration in online learning, we see that, and that's what I've already spoken about. Cultural competency, I think that's certainly coming through in a lot of the job adverts that I looked at in a previous research paper I did recently. Having a mental health focus. Again, I think that we can all see this on the wall, that this is something which is becoming more and more evident, the importance of counsellors being prepared for this particular focus. Evidence-based practice. Now I know that in counselling we often call it evidence-informed practice to recognise a broader range of evidence rather than a more limited range of evidence. But certainly this is what employers are asking for, and this is probably what funding providers of services are asking for. So we need to be able to position ourselves in this space as well. Wellness and preventative care. Crisis and trauma training, and certainly trauma-informed was something which came up quite a lot in this in my recent article in job advertisements. So I think this is a key thing that we should really be onto and embedding into the curriculum. Interdisciplinary collaboration, especially when we become more accepted in the mental health sector. This is going to be something which we need to teach our students. So we've typically taught our students based on the idea that they're going to be outsiders or they're going to be working within community services sort of sector. But we might need to look at how do we ensure that they understand what occupational therapists do and what various other professions do who they might be working alongside in the future. Supervision and mentoring. I'm not sure why that's picked up as a trend, but it's there. Telehealth, and again, I think this is all, we understand this one. and research innovation. And this is something which I'm hoping that we can get some ground over the few years to enhance our research and the importance of it. Academic literature highlights the importance of developing a clear sense of professional identity at a professional level and at an individual level. While we have membership in the profession's peak bodies as a means for supporting our professional identity, I don't think we have a clear sense of our distinctiveness and core values. While we have a sense of how we are distinct, we haven't really clarified it, and hence counsellors may struggle to articulate it. We are often so worried about sectarianism, so our solution has been anything goes philosophically as long as you can articulate it and as long as it's coherent. We have been strong on diversity and inclusiveness for any model, but this has been at the cost of being able to articulate common core values or a distinct paradigm. Our students are therefore exposed to a modality paradigm, or perhaps more commonly exposed to a range of different philosophies from their different trainers of different professional or philosophical backgrounds, from their readings, and are expected to find their way through and integrate it somehow. I think we need a framework that clearly distinguishes our profession, that we can easily communicate, and that is able to support the diversity of members and modalities. One of my PhD students, a clinical psychologist, asked me recently that if counsellors become part of interdisciplinary teams, what will they bring that's not already there? I think this is such an important question for the profession, and that we need to define it. Given our profession is now 25 years old, I think we need to continue looking at higher education staffing profiles to ensure that counselling trained registered counsellors are prioritised for academic appointments, given the importance of students being socialised by staff who themselves were socialised into the same profession. I've seen plenty of examples where university staffing profiles were almost completely colonised by other professions to socialise counsellors. So doing so treats counselling as an activity rather than as a profession. This is where it's important that counselling training standards ensure counsellors are prioritised, because if the counselling profession doesn't require it, it sends a message to higher education institutions that counsellors are optional in the training process of counsellors. Another recommendation I would add is that in the counselling training standards that there is a mention, if not emphasis, on the importance of counselling identity, rather than solely focusing on competencies and knowledge. The National Training Standards brings opportunities for greater recognition from the government. The risk is that the government may seek to superimpose a framework or inject philosophical values that are not congruent with many counsellors' own values. It's important that our profession is not philosophically dictated to by the government. We will be relying heavily on the professional body's advocacy in this regard. And just as an aside, myself and a research team, including Kathy and Elisa, who I believe are here today, we're actually working on this very issue to try and develop a research-informed position as to what's important to our profession, what are our core values that we can state and clearly, so that counsellors have that strong sense of identity. There are a range of risks that education providers might need to be mindful of when planning for the future. The first are accreditation risks, and these are when accreditation standards or processes create barriers, ambiguity, or are out of touch with educational reality. While there needs to be a robustness in the reviewing of education courses, there also needs to be clarity about expectations and no hidden subtext that course providers are just expected to know, or when course providers are held hostage to the whims of accreditation panelists going beyond their written requirements. So that's often a risk. The national training standards may pose risks, particularly if they do not consult sufficiently or if vested interests from outside of counselling are inserted. Curriculum creep, which might be with more expectations but still bound in a 2-year volume of learning type of qualification, such as the Masters. The increased focus on telehealth is for many a new area that had to be inserted into existing curriculum, but there might be many other areas which, as things evolve, that might need to be seen as important that need to go into the curriculum as well. Then we have institutional risks that may be driven by cost savings, profit chasing, increasing workloads, expectations on staff, reduced semesters times, going from 15-week semester down to 13-week, but still having to cover the same amount of material, and without adequate support from the institution. The question as to also how to maintain currency of practice, particularly with full-time educators, or assigning inappropriate staff resourcing or diverting counselling fees to subsidise other disciplines, as we've all sort of seen probably, where especially when we've got counselling a lot in a department with another more dominant profession. It's not unusual for counselling to be treated as the poor cousin. And then we've also got our research being funneled into Q1 and Q2s, which basically means that if it's funneled into Q1 and Q2s, we can't publish into Australian counselling journals, which is a real shame at the moment. We've also got governmental risks. So when the government makes decisions that disadvantage counsellors or perhaps may incentivise counsellors. So Medicare decimated private practice for a time, but also if we get it, money talks and may influence the profession. You know, we look at what's the influence Medicare's had on, Better Access has had on the psychology profession, where it's moved from being quite a diverse, range of specialisations to basically being clinical psych. And I think there's one program left in Australia in counselling psychology, but all the rest have been swallowed up by clinical psych. So government risks are something which we need to be mindful of as well, in terms of the incentives and drivers that they might bring in. They've got ideological risks, so diversity of ideas, diversity of training staff, and lack of clearly articulated agreed philosophy across the profession and potential for disunity are all risks for the quality of socialisation of our students into the profession at the training level. So maintaining philosophical laissez-faire approach in the name of inclusivity means material can be taught in a compartmentalised way, and that's the thing which I'm quite concerned about. Don't have any solutions for it, but I'm concerned about it. The other risks and challenges are staffing risks, which include the struggles to find appropriately qualified and experienced staff who are spread too thin, and certainly in counselling I've certainly seen that happen a lot, especially when you're in leadership and you have expected to be leader, teach, research, run a clinic, the clinic, do research supervision and do service, and there's a whole lot of things that staff have to do, which it's a challenge to keep up. The question of how full-time staff can keep their practice currency, that's really, really difficult to do if you're working 7 days a week and 5 nights a week and days and nights. It's very, very difficult, especially if you're trying to maintain a consistent practice and if you're not given time out of your work to do that. And also, while each course may be expected to have a key philosophy or modality, finding staff who align with that particular philosophy or modality of your training can also be quite tricky as well. Internal ambiguity of distinctiveness, I think this is a risk, and I mentioned that before, that how are we different from other professions, and how do we sort of market ourselves. Internal divisiveness is embedded in our DNA as a profession. The positive side is inclusivity, the negative side is internal divisiveness, and it's an enemy of unity, which much of the professional identity literature emphasises the importance of unity. So we need to work out how we're going to proceed in the future without risking further divisiveness. Prejudice and attitudinal risk, both from external stakeholders towards counsellors, and I was recently reading a textbook in the mental health nursing space, and what they said about counsellors was almost unrepeatable in terms of how we were just so low trained and unregulated, and it was quite misleading and disrespectful. So I think we do get that from from some people within other professions who just do not understand what we do and what our level of training is. But we could also have attitudinal risks from counselling educators being unwilling to adapt to changing expectations in the field of education, in the field of counselling, and also the field's training standards being unable to adapt to cultural or higher education changes. And I was really pleased with PACFA and ACA more recently around, inviting people to come and consult and give feedback on training standards and give ideas and suggestions. And it's lovely when we're brought in and when that consultation happens, rather than just having, here's the next lot of training standards, you deliver it, and without a chance for conversation around it. Okay, last slide, I promise, and well done for hanging in this long. I always find it weird to do these lectures. So where to from here? How do we best position ourselves for change as heads of education? So there's nothing earth-shattering here in this list, but let's go through some ideas. So work with the professional bodies to ensure strategic goals align and are met. working alongside professional body association and becoming involved in various committees creates mutually beneficial relationships and enables two-way influencing and information exchange. And really happy that the PACFA was able to make it, and disappointed that ACA wasn't able to make it this time to our NHCPE event, but certainly that's been a priority of NHCPE, is to try and, you know, have that really positive connections with PACFA and ACA, because we're interdependent on each other, and the collaboration can be really useful for our profession overall. We need to consider and utilise the role of NHCPE and counsellor educator groups within the profession too. So how do we share resources and ideas? Maybe there's ideas for symposiums, potentials for that. I recognise NHCPE heads are incredibly busy, but is there a way we can look for strategic ways to provide more meaningful support and progress? This year we're looking at research as a key focus, and once we get the survey finalised, we'll be sending it out there with what we've found in terms of our research over the year, ideas on how we might increase the capacity of counselling research within an Australian context. So stay tuned to that. It'll turn up one day in your email box, and we encourage you to provide feedback so we can get a sense as to the way forward. There's professional development to keep up, including our research and scholarship in the teaching of counselling. Okay, so and this is a challenge, you know, when you're trying to do your own research in your own area, you're trying to do your teaching, you're trying to juggle everything, you're trying to do your leadership sort of stuff, to try and find focus on research and scholarship of learning and teaching, and that can be quite tricky. Many institutions do have people who can support us in that space, the learning and teaching officers. So certainly feel free to reach out to them, and you know, what you learn, share it with the NHCPE, so that you know, let's share ideas. We're not in some sense we're in competition with each other, but at this level we're generally very willing and open to sharing good teaching practices with each other too. So certainly feel free to do that. Engage in industry to ensure that our courses are contemporary and that we can gain feedback from industry in relation to our students and graduate performance. So yeah, we want to make sure that what we're doing is actually leading to graduates who are good quality graduates who get good outcomes with clients and are good employees within the workplace. So consider how to actually do that and keep our finger on the pulse, essentially. We need to research to contextualise higher education trends into the counselling field. So how did we adapt to COVID? What lessons did we learn? How do we adapt to AI? I think these are really important, and you know, my hope is to try and stay on the forefront of this rather than lagging behind and sort of digging our heels and saying, no, I'm not going, it's evil. To me, it's around trying to have those open up attitudes, but at the same time being cautious and not sort of jumping in headfirst into something without considering the consequences too. I'd really encourage us to look at the shared philosophy and that question of distinctive identity and clarity of distinctiveness, and also how do we move from compartmentalisation to integration. Now, not everybody might agree with me on this one. This is just my perception, and if you don't agree, that's okay. But this is something which is important to me, is how do we do that, given that most of our textbooks come from America or come from psychology or come from social work, and we just how do we actually help our counselling students to learn from these, you know, multidisciplinary areas, but how do we help them to integrate that into the values as a counsellor and into their practice as a counsellor, not as a pseudo-psychologist or pseudo something else. Okay, so this is in my view. Staffing, leadership in higher ed, counselling and research, and how do we support our staff in the higher ed? How do we support the pipeline coming into it? How do we support them when they're there? How do we help them thrive? It's all those sort of, how do we support them in their research? Given that counsellors, you know, sometimes, and some of us here might be a bit intimidated the whole idea of research, and you know, you're very confident in your practice, but you may not be so confident in terms of research discussions and discourse and processes. So we need to, how do we support that as the NHCPE and within our institutions as well? Now, also I think that in terms of standardisation, and this I might be shot down, and you might press stop here in disgust, but in my sense, I think we need to standardise even more And one of my suggestions would be that all our students learn CBT, because CBT is the universal language of mental health. Okay, so all our graduates have CBT. They also have a model which is more closely aligned with more of the counselling values that we haven't yet fully distinguished. So they have a core model within that, but they also, I think they need to know how to do CBT, because this is the language of our culture. This is the language of the mental health. And if we having people who graduate and they can't do that and they're putting in job thing, it sort of sends a signal as to, you spend 2 years studying counselling, you can't even do the basic therapy that everybody can do. So to me, that's my view. I might be shot down because I know a lot of people may not be so comfortable with the CBT, but it's like English. It's a universal language in my view. But we don't want to have that overtake us so that we're all CBT without that sort of, in my view, we need humanistic therapies as well, which as the balance to the CBT. And and hopefully we'll get some opportunity to look into the training standards, the national training standards, and have contribution to that. That's exciting. I hope, let's come in with a really positive view on that, but also and support our professional bodies as they negotiate with the government. Hopefully we'll have a chance to also contribute our viewpoints as well into it. And just want to wish everybody the best day today. I'm sorry I can't join you. And I can't wait to hear some of the updates and reports as to how today went. So thanks all, and enjoy your day.